get my bio out. We'll be live in just a moment. Now, why is it going so slowly? Give me 1 second, Joya. Okay, there we go. Good evening, good evening, good evening. We are so excited to have you guys to join us tonight on the Black Intellectualism Movement. We have an exciting conversation for you. As you know, when my head is down, that just simply means that I am tapping into the conversation, making sure to share it on the page right quick to bring you guys into the conversation. I am so excited about tonight's guest and tonight's conversation, and I'll share why with you in just a moment. Um, and so I just want to remind you guys to please chime in with your comments. Feel free to ask questions and we'll try to get to them because, sometimes this conversation gets a little spicy, honey. And then we don't get exactly right to the questions like we plan to, but we will try to get to our questions. If we don't, we'll try to make sure to get those answers to you later. Tag your friends, share this conversation. We are continuing part 2 of the Education and Incarceration series. And today I'm really, really excited to talk about the death penalty. And so we'll talk about it as it relates to what's going on in our country, but in particular, what's going on in the state of Louisiana and why we need to be alert about what's going on with the justice system and how we can be active in our communities to speak up on this behalf. So, now you all know what happens whenever I get the chance to talk with people who know me. And tonight's guest is one such woman. I'm so excited to have Joia Erin as a guest with us tonight. And, Joia has been so encouraging. She's been sending a lot of positive love behind the scenes for me to continue doing the work that I'm doing. She has been doing some amazing social justice work. And I've been wanting to harass her for a long time and ask her to come on to the Black Intellectualism Movement. And I finally got the courage to say, look, can you come on and talk with us about some of the amazing things that you are doing? Because she has really been doing some southern region advocacy work, but she works all over the country. And so I think that that's really exciting because we need to continue to talk about what's going on here in the South. We need women of culture to be that, women of the Black community and culture to be that mouthpiece. And we need the work to keep going, period. So before we get into the conversation, I'm going to first read Joia's biography, and then I'll let her have room to talk. And then, honey, if we get carried away, just know that we went to undergrad together. We were dear friends in undergrad. I just told her, I said, it's been like 15 years since I hugged you because she always has such a wonderful spirit. And that's why I loved her so much in college. So I'm just so glad to see her. So let me get off the personal tip because Joia Erin Thornton is an avid civil rights advocate, writer, historian, and policy leader. Ms. Thornton has a unique hometown experience growing up in both Memphis, Tennessee, and New Orleans, Louisiana, two cities on the mighty Mississippi River, riddled with class, race, and educational disparities that have heavily impacted her passion and work toward the continued progression of civil and human rights. And that's just such a rich, two of the richest cities in the South when we talk about history and culture. And so it's so symbolic, that you would end up in both of those places. An ample amount of her work is dedicated to grass tops organizing, program implementation, and model design in state and national policy. A few of her most notable speaking engagements and projects include National Habeas Seminar, Clemency and Coalition Building, NAACP Legal Defense Fund Capital Punishment Conference, Federal Resource Council, Community Lawyering Panel, and the National Civil Rights Museum Journey to Justice Symposium. She has also launched the Faith Leaders of Color Coalition, or FLOCC, a group of BIPOC faith leaders concerned about the use of the death penalty state and nationwide. Ms. Thornton has a Bachelor of Arts from Louisiana State University in French and English, and a Master of Public Administration in Policy and Legal Studies from the University of Memphis. Most recently, Ms. Thornton has joined the 2021 Leadership Memphis Executive Cohort class. Ms. Thornton has fervent passion and heart to end systemic biases in all socioeconomic sectors. So she really has a such a passion for the community advocacy work. And you guys already know nothing makes me more excited than to sit with other women and men and talk about the mighty work that's being done across the Black community to continue to advocate for our people. So, is there anything that I missed in there that you want to make sure that people know about you?
No, thank you so much for that, Jamie. And with all of that said, I am still just Joia. It doesn't matter how many commas are behind your name. It matters
I
the
love
work
it.
that you're doing and the legacy that you will
I
leave.
love
So
it.
I think that
I
was
love
wonderful.
it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I guess we'll start with the first question. It's always fun to start talking about, to get down to the business. But I think behind the aspect of business as it relates to every person, there has to be passion. What
Mm,
makes you get up in the morning? What makes you choose this field of work? And especially when it comes to social justice work, because it can be so tasking. My first question is, what is the driving motivation behind the social justice work that you do?
right. And I love this conversation. And as you said before, I am cheering you on behind the scenes. I love the work that you've done and how we've grown from undergraduates to
Thank
now
you.
professional women that are making a mark on our community for the good.
Yes,
So for
yes,
me, I'm compelled to do this work because I got the education, I did the research, I looked at the numbers, the data, I met
yes,
exonerees, I met family members of murder victims who were traumatized and also confused and jaded a little bit by our criminal legal system, by the actors within that system who either lied on them or lied to them, or they didn't have the resources to fight against a machine that is inherently and historically racist and also ableist and biased. So these are not talking points, these are actual stories. These are stories, these are experiences, and also data and facts that
yes,
illuminate an abhorrent system that is as old as Southern lynchings. So when you think about all of those things, you have to get involved because it's not just one thing. It's so many different things that I pull from when people want to have conversations. And I always say, let's have a conversation. You don't have to agree with my advocacy and my work, but let's just have a conversation and let me inform you of some things so you can have an informed decision and informed opinion.
I like that. I like that. And I
Yeah,
like how you talk about the historical aspects of um, what the experience has been like with what we call the justice system in this
right,
country, especially for Black people. And a lot of times people don't like to admit the dark part of the justice system, especially in the South. But as we continue to see it repeat itself over and over again, it's like until we come to grips with that history, we can't really change it, right?
right, right. We have
And
to
so,
name.
what are some ways that you kind of see that play out in the work that you do?
Oh, wow. It's so many different ways that I can come in. I think Brian Stevenson at the Equal Justice Initiative has done a phenomenal job. And if you haven't had an opportunity to go visit the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, you, Jamie, or even your listeners, people participating or listening to this conversation at another time, please go to Montgomery, Alabama. Now, as a Black person, I can't really say a lot of reasons to go to Montgomery, Alabama, but the Equal Justice Initiative is one reason to go to Montgomery, Alabama, and just learn and read about the different victims of lynching and the reasons why they were lynched, for not crossing
Absolutely.
the street or because a vigilante white mob was angry that the justice system wasn't moving fast enough. So I'm a big proponent, and we all have parents that say if you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it. And we're repeating it every day. We're repeating it in the courtroom every day with prosecutorial misconduct, with police bias, implicit and explicit bias within our judicial system. So it's very important. And as I mentioned, and I just want to tie in my earlier comments, that you know these things, that people are not just
Absolutely.
telling you these things. You know, you need to watch 13th. You need to read books like Just Mercy and not just watch
Yes.
the
Yes. Yes.
those things that as we get older, you really want to know what are the things within this system that I can speak to
Absolutely.
or that I resonate with and I want to speak out against.
It's so interesting that you brought up the work of Mr. Brian Stevenson, because I also read The Sun Does Also Shine, which
Anthony
was
Rayner.
another man who, yes, and I did a discussion on that last year, and how he served, I think it was 28 years
Yes.
for a crime he did not commit, and he was set for death row.
Hmm.
And so when you brought that up, because I had been thinking about it all week as we got closer to the interview. I had been thinking about reading his book, and had a man in Louisiana recently, just a couple of weeks ago, from, I think, from Marksville, not from Marksville, who served 40 years in prison, and had spent, I think it was over 20 of them, trying to get at least another hearing. And I want to just say something that's being uncomfortable to me.
Mm.
If we really deal with history, the number of false accusations that have come from um, white communities and white women,
Yes, I was
um,
just about to say
it,
that. Go ahead and name that.
to get revenge and to retaliate, and there are still black men who are serving time right now. I think sometimes we don't really get a grip on just how far, like how it's not been that long since the Jim Crow era. And
Right,
that just because the Jim Crow laws were brought to an end, you had people that was that live today that were actively part of those cities, those that belief system. And so
right.
people are still suffering, especially, I would say, in our state, in other parts of the South. And so when you said the things that you were sharing a minute ago, I just started thinking to myself, like, the 70s wasn't that long ago. That's just 10 years post Jim Crow. And people talk about the prime of the 70s and old afros, but you realize that was just 10 years post Jim Crow. If you hit 1970 itself, maybe 5 or 4 years post Jim Crow. So what you said was just so, it just kind of, really shook me up, because it's so truthful that people still suffer from those things. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and not just that. And when you talk about, tying in the topic of education, that's why so many states, and I'm working closely in Johnston County in North Carolina, and they have been kind of the epicenter of denying and trying to get rid of, or they're saying critical race theory should not be taught in schools. So they're kind of like the epicenter of that happening. When you think about why it's just a vehement fight to not have critical race theory taught in schools, it's because it wasn't that far. It's because some of those last names may pop up if teachers were to do a deep dive into the history. And we talked about the black men that are still serving time. There are white women that are still out. I mean, Carolyn Bryant from Emmett
Still
Till's
alive.
case in Money,
Still
Mississippi,
alive. Mm-hmm.
she's still alive.
Still alive.
You
Still
know, when
alive.
I talk about that to people, they're like, no, she isn't. That happened like in the 1930s. It happened in the 1950s, and she is still
Still
alive
alive.
today and well.
Absolutely. 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 And with that being said, we don't like to realize how that ties into the system, but it ties directly into why the work you do is so important. And we're
Right.
going to have some more. And it's so crazy to have, because let me tell you a real really shook me up whenever I saw you talking about it and coming here to Louisiana. That
Mhm.
within the past couple of months, I've been doing more posts about it, and I was even reading up. A couple of years back, they were saying that the statistics on the number of black men who were exonerated was like 90% of exonerees were black men. I think
Mhm.
the last time I looked, it might have been like close to 70% or something like that. It had dropped. But every single time we see a story, it's black men
Yeah.
who are being exonerated by faith and grace, we hope, because there are a lot of people who go to their grave saying I didn't do it.
Right. I mean, thank God for the exonerations,
Okay.
and
So let's get to
we'll get more
let's get to
into that conversation. And I know you haven't asked the question, but we definitely need to talk about people
okay, let me
who oppose it. And I have an answer. I don't have an answer, but I have a food for thought for
okay.
that.
Let me get there. Let me get there. I get excited. Okay, so the next question says, many people say you do the crime, you do the time. And you've kind of already hinted on this. Why is the death penalty so problematic?
Right. And you hinted on this too. I'm thinking about hiring you to do some policy work for us. But I do want to you got your facts straight. I was like, look at her
What?
spitting out all these
I'm
things.
ready.
We have to
I'm
fulfill some
ready.
fulfill some
I'm
speaking
ready.
engagements.
I am definitely ready. I am
But
ready.
I do want to uplift those who have loved ones or who have been harmed by people who did not
Absolutely.
think about the consequences of their actions. I've been the victim of crime. And in that vulnerable place, you want something to be done. The feelings are raw, the feelings are real, and you're very vulnerable. But what makes my work so necessary and so valuable is that it focuses on the single issue of the death penalty, capital punishment, and its practice. And it's been proven time and time again to be arbitrarily used against people of color. And people don't understand that it's not just with the defendants, but everyday citizens. Right now, we are fighting a case through litigation in Florida against a prosecutor's office who have excused and recused or removed Black jurors in capital cases simply because of their race. In North Carolina, there is ongoing Racial Justice Act litigation that requires a prisoner's death sentence to be overturned and or reversed if racial bias was included in the seeking to impose the death penalty in their case. So when you talk about capital punishment, you talk about everything that stems from it. There are other active lawsuits when it comes to race and capital punishment. And so to answer your question, you do the crime, you do the time. Well, sometimes those accused, they didn't do the crime. So
Absolutely.
what do we do? If the death sentence actually does not fit the bill, sometimes in the case of the crime, the capital punishment system is the only system that is unreversible. Is irreversible. Once you have executed someone, you can't dig them back up and say, we're sorry. So when I said, thank God for the people who have been exonerated, who have been granted clemency, whose sentences have been commuted, because there are so many nameless others that have been executed. And 10 years later, we test the DNA. We finally test the DNA, and the DNA shows that this person, in fact, did not commit that crime. So for me, I have to question a system like that is irreversible and
Absolutely.
it's so final. And regardless of what your moral compass is, you have to understand that this system, if you can't get it right 100% of the time, it doesn't need to be in practice when it comes to life and death.
You made me think about as well, like the number of, just the history behind how bloody this practice has been. The number of people that are being exonerated or honored after death now as history goes on. Um, because they didn't commit crimes or they didn't get a fair trial. Or the uncomfortable thing about it is when you start looking at story after story after story as we go through our history, the practices are not really changing. How
Mm,
cases are being tried, what methods are being used, and why people are being falsely accused. And in some cases, even looking at the system and going, oh, you didn't even thoroughly investigate the case. So when you talk about if it can't be 100%, and we think about like just the fact that these are human decisions that are made, right? These are human humans make the decision, and we don't ever have a way of really knowing why people choose what they do. You know,
yeah,
we can say, we can draw conclusions, but do we ever really know? And a lot of times we'll
mm,
find out after the fact. Do we ever know?
right, right. You have people who have mental challenges, who have intellectual disabilities, and you have some downright people who have done some of the heinous things that they've been accused of, or it's been
No
proven
doubt.
that they've done.
No doubt.
But
Absolutely.
you have other, you have people that have been sentenced to like 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, or even 15 years. That particular system, you can look at it, it can be reversed, a person can have an appeal, but the capital punishment system is so final. So the fact that we as a civilized nation are still using it as a practice, which it is not a deterrent to crime, and that's been proven time and time again, we have to question why the thirst for death. And even in the South, like, why does the South really want to win at that? I have a theory for that. I actually have an article for why the former Confederate South really wants to win. But
Can
if
you
you look
tell?
at,
Okay, can you share? And even send
well,
us that article.
I would actually give you a link to my article in the Death Penalty
I
Information Center
thank
that talks
thank
about why the South really wants to win post the Civil War, because they didn't
please.
win. So when you look at the two maps of the states that held on to lynching the longest, these are the same states, and the maps can kind of like overlay on each other. These are the same states that not only execute the most people, but they are still holding on to the most heinous practices of execution. Right now in South Carolina, the firing squad is being mentioned as a method of execution for an individual. The firing squad, meaning people can sign up and shoot an individual legally, which we are now calling in our work judicial homicide. So this is something that we really need to think about, like why in southern states it's so repugnant. Like we need to think about that.
That is really that really makes me nervous because it's kind of weird to me to know that people actually want to sign up for it because I was wondering what the qualifications are to sign up for because I was seeing that every time a police officer shoots somebody,
Yes.
they have to go through therapy. So if you sign up
Mm,
for the firing squad, do you have to go through some kind of evaluation before and after that experience? That was just weird. And a man signed up for it this week. So
mm,
somewhere there's somebody gung ho to go out and kill somebody. It's
gung
almost
ho.
contradictory. You know, they are
And
very, and this man doesn't deny whether he's guilty. So that's not what we're saying. He chose this. To my knowledge, he hasn't said he's not guilty. But it's just interesting to me because I would never want to be the person to actually be on the firing squad to kill somebody.
right, and a lot of prisoners, are a lot of people living in prison are choosing this because the firing squad is the quickest. It's the quickest way. And then you have lethal injection, then you have the gas chamber, then you have electrocution. So firing squad, then electrocution, then the gas chamber, then lethal injection. So those are the ways that you can die under the capital punishment system. So a lot of people are utilizing that because it's the quickest. Now, I would be like you said, Jamie, I would be completely traumatized if I heard about somebody who had been executed by the state with a firing squad. But yeah, a lot of people living in prison are choosing it because it's the quickest.
That's interesting. And we are going to provide that link for you, Mr. Moffitt. So we'll be getting that
Yeah.
over. So my next question kind of brings us home to Louisiana.
Hmm.
So well, let's skip that one and come back. So why
Okay.
is the subject of the death penalty so important to the Black community in particular? Let's dig into that first.
So one of my frames that I speak from, and I speak with two frames when I talk about the death penalty, and I'm about to add on another one when it comes to trauma. But the two frames that I currently use right now are race in the death penalty and also the issue of faith. That is a bipartisan strategy. No matter how far right you lean, how far left you lean, particularly in the South, you are a part of some type of affiliation. You went to somebody's Sunday school, vacation Bible school, or something. So
Yeah,
you, at
yeah.
your core, you know about faith, and you had some type of experience or engagement with faith. So when I talk about
Absolutely.
race and the death penalty, it's not spoken about enough. It has. So in the recent years, people have been speaking about it. Like I just mentioned, Brian Stevenson speaks about it a lot. You have Sister Helen Prajan. She's starting to speak out a little bit more about race and the death penalty. We have to talk about that because when you think about the number of people who are indigenous and who are Black that are on many of these southern death rows, you really can't, like, you can't escape it, because the majority of defendants, the majority of the people that are on death row are either Black or indigenous in southern states. It's a
Absolutely.
large number of us. Now, you do have white individuals on death row, but when you talk about the cases of the people that are Black, it's always something. It's always some type of prosecutorial misconduct. The case of Johnny Lee Gates in Georgia, where prosecutors were excusing members of the jury in Johnny Lee Gates' case to make sure that he received a death sentence. And they wrote down, if an individual was white, they put W. If an individual was Black, they put N. And we all know what that N stands for. So when you talk about individuals who come into a system, regardless of if they are an attorney or a judge or a police officer or whomever, they come into this system with bias. We all come into systems with bias. So when you say
Absolutely.
trust the system, do you trust yourself? So how can you trust the system? Yeah, I don't trust myself. We've all heard a joke or two. We've all participated in a laugh or two when it comes at another race or ethnicity's expense. Not saying that it's right, but culturally, sometimes when we are away from the office, we hear things like that. Black
Hmm.
people, white
Hmm.
people, Asian people, Latinx people, we hear things like that.
Absolutely.
So when we have
Absolutely.
these ingrained biases already in us, do we
Hmm.
trust ourselves in the capital punishment system when it comes to life or death to get these things right? And most often, Black people have been, foundational Black people have been negatively portrayed in the media, in history.
Absolutely.
There are so many
Absolutely.
stereotypical bias that exist within Black people. And until we can speak to this issue of white supremacy, white fragility, and white superiority in America, Black people have to be at the forefront of these conversations because we are the ones that are most harmed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so interesting that you talk about all of the biases and things that exist, and how we have to be involved just for the sake of that, because it's to be perfectly honest about how the system is designed in a manner that says, especially in our state, and we'll get into that in a minute. But if we look at the history of the how the system has been set up to say we are going to target this group of people,
Mm,
because we want to make sure that if we don't, you talk about the 13th, right? If we cannot legally keep them enslaved and tied to the land, where are all these systems that can be put in place here? And I think that when we talk about the death penalty, it gets a little bit deeper than that, because it's
mm,
like some of it seems like it comes down to how is Black life valued?
mm,
How is Black life respected in the same capacity that other people's lives are respected? Um,
right.
and then what things are being done just out of anger, right? And so it's one thing if a person is doing it, but as we talked about at the beginning, um, at the beginning of when we go back in history, right? A lot of these measures were put in place specifically to allow Black men and women have to be of
Yeah.
victimized by this system just off the strength of
Right.
someone being angry, not wanting you to have any power or not wanting you to have any freedom. So if we can't get you this way, then know that we are going to put this system in place another way to ensure that you are reminded where you
Yeah.
belong in society.
And the rules are always changing. And the majority of us who were not indigenous to this land that were brought over from Africa, we were viewed as property. And when we talk about things that are not that far removed, and my sister that started the 1619 project, Ida Bay Wells, you have to think about, like, we were viewed less than, and those types of ideologies and thinkings are passed down from one generation to the next. So when you have these ideologies that Black life does not matter, Black life is not valued, Black life is property, you as a Black person have to care about the capital punishment system and how it so closely mirrors white mob vigilante lynchings. It is the exact same. You talk about 50% of prosecutors in the United States of America are white, and the number is even higher for white men. That cultural experience is different. Those conversations are passed down. So we just have to name these things. We have to stop being so nice about certain things and worrying about if we're making people feel uncomfortable. We have to name how this system harms us and do whatever is in our power to correct it and mitigate it.
we have a we have a question, and he said we don't have to answer it, but it's very important to me. So I'm
Okay.
gonna let you answer first, and then I'm
Okay.
gonna talk as well. I think this is important to talk about,
I think I saw it in
especially
the
it's one of the things I think it's something that probably pops up in your line of work a lot. So he says, do we believe that our culture promoting violence contributes to this prejudge and predominantly Black contributes?
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, I believe the question is saying our culture, being foundational Black people, we have a tendency to promote violence, I believe, through music or through movies, especially in the 80s and the early 90s. Do we believe that this contributes to people prejudging us? I would absolutely disagree with that. And this also kind of plays into that notion of white superiority. This is what you're doing to each other. White on white violence is not talked about. Latinx on Latinx violence is not talked about. Asian on Asian violence is not talked about. People tend to offend in their communities, people they are closely connected to. There's violence everywhere. White men in the 80s with the grunge and the raves, or at football games and soccer games when they get mad, that's violence too. We're just cool. Our culture is just cool. So people tend to gravitate to hip hop, to rap, to trap music a little bit more because it's popularized. But in other countries, they're just as violent. In other cultures, they are just as violent. And when you talk about Italian cultures, why are mob movies glorified?
Mob movies.
You have movies like Boys in the Hood that really talk about the lives that people go through in South Central LA. They're seen as, this is what we're projecting. No, someone is telling their story. They're telling their story, y'all. Like, I was not, I come from an upper middle class suburban family. So I wasn't privy, and I didn't understand that. I had to really understand as a Black woman what people went through in under-resourced, urban, low-income communities. So I had to learn about that. Let people tell their stories. That's their stories. And if you have a story to tell your story. But as far as like promoting violence, no, our culture is just cooler. And people know about our culture a little bit more because people gravitate towards, like, people like Bad Baby and Woah Vicky and all these other white teens that gravitate to Black culture. No, I do not think that. I think that it's because of the system of white supremacy that says black people are savages and they are just killing each other, but they are killing each other too, white people too.
I'm gonna start off by saying I'm coming right up behind my sis on
And I'm
everything.
sorry I was
Facts.
preaching.
Um, and these kind of statements like make me very emotional because it ties into how we still see ourselves as a
Mm,
culture and as a people in a negative light, and how much we have been emotionally destroyed in this
traumatized.
country and around the world, not see the best in our people as much as we have done. You know, do you know that rappers made rap music from basically nothing? They figured out a way to start using their poetic skills to add a beat to it and create their own because there wasn't an artistic space for them. Rap music is probably the most popular form of music across this world. But every time we as Black people come in the room and start dominating, then we get ostracized for what we do with little of nothing. There has
Mhm.
been nothing that Black people have obtained that society has not tried to strip away from us. It's the
Yeah.
same thing that happened, right? So, in 18, after we were finally emancipated, right? And as soon as Black people were quote unquote freed, and baby, we came in going hard. We were getting elected into positions. We were
Parties,
registering.
sororities, and
We
fraternities.
came
Yeah.
in going hard. You hear me? And we were
Yeah.
in there like putting systems in place for our people. We were building our own communities. We weren't bothering anybody. We were thriving, and they came in and they just burnt our communities down. And
Mm.
they killed our people. They killed Black politicians, and then they ended the Emancipation Proclamation after barely 10 years. I'm sorry, it makes me real emotional tonight to talk about this. And over again, I keep watching more documentaries that pop up and tell us about riots and massacres. And every time Black men tried to protect Black women, they
Mm.
killed them. And so we think about when Black men entered the military and fought for a country that had no respect for them. And they
Yeah.
turned around to pay Black men, and they had to fight to receive pay when they were the ones that were saving this country. And then they put the GI Bill in place, and
Mm.
Black men didn't even they could only access,
Nope.
I think it was 3.5% of the rights that were included in that bill. They couldn't even get housing because white
Right.
soldiers didn't want Black people in the same neighborhoods as them, which is how Black men went to fight war, came back to this country and got treated worse at home than they were overseas. Which is why when you started seeing Black writers thriving and doing well in this country, they ran to Paris to live. Richard Wright
Right.
ran to Paris. James Baldwin ran to Paris because every
Josephine
single
Baker. Yeah.
time we put our hands on something to make it work, Josephine Baker, then it is stripped from us, and then we're looked at as, oh, you're a horrible person. And they start telling us negative things about our community. They start blaming it on us when so many things that we are experiencing are a result of trauma. And the way that we
Right.
tend to look at each other, the disenfranchised people of our community who just haven't gotten there yet, we look through them through the lens of
Right.
criticism. Now, there are bad people and good people on every side of the line. And those actions should not be associated with us about on the basis of race, but we have definitely been conditioned to believe that we as Black people don't
Right.
have much good to us, and it has affected everything, and it's affected a lot of people's will to fight against
Yeah.
unjust systems
Yeah.
like this. Joya, your mindset would have been, well, because the A, B, C, D, E, F, G, that's why people get, that's why Black people suffer this way. You wouldn't even be a voice of advocacy the way you are on this platform. Like there would not be a push with women like you, with men like you, with people, with your cohorts and colleagues and people from diverse backgrounds who see it. And I think that there's still so much work to be done for
Hmm.
us to see it in ourselves, but it's
Yeah.
hard. It's
Yeah.
me.
It's one of my favorite scriptures is the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. And what I say, and I had a conversation with a friend of mine a couple of days ago, and he basically said, how can we change this entire system? How can we change the oppression? How can we change how people view us? I always say, start with one thing that you're passionate about. If it's education, advocate for that.
Yeah.
If it's the criminal legal system, advocate for that. If it's mental health, if it's real estate, if it's medicine, because we know racism occurred in medicine with Henrietta Lacks and the gynecologists that did their practices on slaves without any type of sedatives. So we know that racism has existed in this country in every single sector. So with that said, pick your part of the pie that is more passionate to you. We can't change the world. And you know what? We're not about to have an oppression war either. I'm more oppressed in Mississippi than Alabama, than Tennessee, than Louisiana. We all are. But it's more in Mississippi. It's more everywhere. If you're in the southern state and in some Midwest states too, and northern, but pick your platform, stand on your platform, get educated, and change your part of that sector. And if we all work together and we all get on code, we can start to see transformation happen.
Yes, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. We can start to see transformation happen. And I think that, like, that's it. We can start to see transformation happen. And I think that we have to bring ourselves away from, as well, we'll hear other people say in a minute, like, it's not about talking about who's at fault. I think we have to stray away from that as well, because if we have problems within a system that's made to protect and support, we need to address the system that's made to protect and support.
Yeah, and I don't stop making people feel comfortable. Like even with nonprofits that to say, why aren't there more Black people on the board? Not, I noticed. Well, I see. Well, how many years have it been? Why aren't there more Black people on the board?
Why not?
Why did we fight so hard in 2020? With the uprising to be quiet and docile and go back into our corners in 2022. The time is now. The revolution is here. Every group, every decade, from the silent generation to the boomers to the Gen Xers to us millennials and now Gen Z, have did their part to move us closer to liberation. So I would say keep working. We're not going to change. Rome wasn't built in a day. We're not going to change everything that we need to see in our lifetime. But I tell you, our ancestors would have loved to see where we are right now. They would have loved to see where we are right now. And if we want the future to be better, we have to start fighting, and we have to get involved in our part of the fight in whatever way we can.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that. Our ancestors would love to see. And I think that that's one thing that we don't address enough, is how far we have been able to come, how much, Black people have achieved despite the challenges that we face ahead. And that's why the work that you do is so important, because imagine if we could make an impact on the system that says, let's stop here. Then you give somebody else hope that says, okay, let's work with these other kids, because let's get to this good state stats. Okay, so because we'll be going all night, so let me get to this good state stats and we'll come back around. Okay, so
I'm ready.
1/3 of the Louisiana population is Black. Yet Black people are over 65% of the prison population. Let's talk about that issue as it relates to what's going on with our state and the Black community.
Well, and I'm going to look down a lot because I want to make sure that I have these facts right. If anyone is listening and they want to find out more information, after this, I'm going to send you a lot of links that you can blast out to folks, even for the next conversation. But Louisiana is so unique. Along with so many stats, Louisiana has cost taxpayers more than $200 million on its death penalty system in the last 15 years. And again, the death penalty remains a non-deterrent to crime. Also, more than 80% of the 241 death sentences in Louisiana since it was reinstated in 1976, because it was a period in time where the federal government did away with the death penalty completely for 3 years. And states like Georgia and Florida and Louisiana quickly made state laws to reinstate the death penalty in their particular states. So it was found that the death penalty was arbitrary, that it was racist, but it was saying that you can't it wasn't saying that you can ever have the death penalty. It was just saying you have to give us a better reason of why you want the death penalty. So the southern states, they went to work and they reapplied the death penalty in 1976. So I did want to add that little piece of history. So since it was reinstated in 1976, there have been more than 80% of sentences that have been overturned or reversed on appeal in Louisiana. And also, the race of the victim compared to the defendant or those accused has a lot to do with whether the death sentence is sought out or imposed on an individual. So it also clearly speaks to this protection and value of white life in the Louisiana judicial system. And just a few days ago,
Can you
legislation.
go back to that 80% number you gave us? I'm sorry to cut you off, but I
Sure.
wanted to make sure I heard you correctly on,
Yeah, more than
you said
80% of the 241 death sentences in Louisiana since it was reinstated in 1976 have been overturned and or reversed on appeal. So in
80%
Louisiana,
overturned or reversed on appeal.
80%, 80% have been overturned or reversed on appeal. So again, it goes back to this idea of when you execute someone, it's final. You can't reverse that. If someone is sentenced to life in prison, then you possibly can. If someone is sentenced to 30 years, then you can if there's evidence to show that this individual was innocent. And I urge everyone to go to my partners, the Innocence Project page. They have so many facts and information that they can provide for those who are still seeking. Is it really that many people that are exonerated? Yes, they are. And a lot of them come from Louisiana. So I also want to highlight too that the race of the victim against the accused determines a death sentence. So this protection and value of white life over others is clearly communicated in Louisiana as with other states. So this legislation that was just turned down by a vote of 5-1, I want to shout out Senator Katrina Jackson for doing a phenomenal job for carrying this bill all the way to committee. There were advocates all around the country. There were all eyes on Louisiana, the Promise of Justice Initiative, my friend Michael Calhoun, Jamila Johnson, and others that were at the forefront of really pushing these bills to be passed. They did phenomenal work. But in Louisiana, your senators shot this bill down because they wanted to send a clear message that in the state of Louisiana, even though they haven't executed an individual in more than 11 years because of lethal injection litigation, and that's another thing I want to talk about towards the end about what I'm working on. They still said that the death sentence will still be a practice that is upheld in Louisiana, even though we haven't used it in 11 years. So I just really wanted to make that clear for Louisiana that we need more. We need you guys to get on the battlefield. We need you guys to get on the battlefield in Louisiana.
Do you think that that's more about an ego move, or by what people actually think is a real solution?
Well, let me tell you what I've told other people in talking about Louisiana and in other southern states. You have senators and representatives that know the system is wrong, but it's almost kind of like the analogy, the comparison of the emperor's new clothes. It's like everybody sees that it's something wrong with it, but no one really wants to say anything. And southern senators and representatives definitely don't want to be the first ones to say something. So it's this idea of conservatives understanding that there are things that are fundamentally wrong and flawed with the capital punishment system. Hence the reason why we're in this lethal injection litigation in Louisiana for so long,
Mhm.
but they don't want to speak out. So it's going to take pressure from voters to vote them out and really speak to them and ask them questions on why they voted the abolishment down. Call them out.
Absolutely. 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 I like what you said. Call it out, have some accountability. And that's a whole different conversation you and I will have to have off camera
Yes,
about what it actually takes for voices to be heard in this state.
I'm gonna give you some
And
strategies.
if it's we'll have to talk further because it's unfortunately one of the truisms about ensuring that the cries of the public are heard and respected, especially as it relates to issues that are often tied to income and money in this state. And we know that unfortunately prisons are for profit in Louisiana.
Yes.
And so we'll talk further because that's a very interesting conversation, but a meaningful one. I'm gonna throw this comment in and I'm gonna respond to it and I'll let you respond to it and we're gonna move past this component to ensure we get to the rest of it. But I want to get this we had a little bit of feedback from what we were sharing earlier.
Sure,
Um,
sure. I love conversations like this.
he says, Mr. Moffitt says, just to pinpoint, there's literally adults that say don't go to class and don't go to play ball. Instead, go sell that drug, go commit that crime, go commit the scam. I believe Black leader voices in this realm promote this. So I disagree, but I do agree that the system is slanted toward racism. There's a theory, and then that's actually what happens. I'm not here to divide, just give feedback. And we appreciate that feedback. And what we are not disputing is whether or not crimes actually happen. That's
Right.
not what we're talking about here. We're not saying crimes don't actually happen. Crimes happen. But we are saying two things. Number one, crimes happen within every race. Crime does not solely belong to the Black community. Is
Yes.
it exploited most against the Black community? Yes,
Right.
it does. That's indisputable. We've seen study after study that confirms such things. Number two, the other component of it is this: that does not mean that people deserve to receive extreme sentences or unfair sentences. And I will say, as a person that taught high school for several years, I saw it come across my desk all the time. Young Black students who had a first offense that was not that serious or a one-time offense that made a mistake get sent to juvenile detention and they don't get out until after they graduate. And I
Mm.
had non-Black students, white students, who committed the same things worse, and they get nothing. Come back with maybe probation for a year or two, or a slap on the wrist that says, "Oh, we're going to put you in some rehab classes, and we just want to make sure you stay in school."
Hmm.
And so that's what the conversation is about, not whether these things are actually happening. It's about how we are addressing it in regards to whether it's a one race thing or a person thing, and how is the
Right.
system working on that path. So I'm sorry, Joya.
No, I actually think that was great.
Is
I
there
agree with everything you're saying. And Quentin, just to be clear, and I hope I'm saying your name right. I hate to butcher people's names because my name is a name that some people don't get right. Um, I think you have to be really, really careful and clear about your experience. I'm not around people who say don't go to class and commit crimes and sell drugs. I think that's something that is unique to you and maybe other people that share your same experience. Again, I was raised in an upper middle class Black family, and education was a non-negotiable. So I don't really understand what you're saying there. Maybe it's a story, and like I said, we all have stories that need to be told. And if that's something that is an experience that you've seen, that's something that you should tell and that you should try to change. But I want us to be very careful about applying things like that to an entire race. Black people are not a monolith. Black people come in
that's a good
so
one?
many different classes, races, and thought,
That's a good.
color, thought patterns.
That's a good
We
one.
don't share religions. We're not a
That's a good one.
monolith. It's this whole, I don't think we can curse on here, but it's this whole it's this whole
Fine,
idea
sis, go ahead. Go ahead.
to
Go ahead.
the big black syndrome. We all one big black person. I think that was like alliteration. That's my English degree. But I think it's just like we all want to apply everyone to like this one syndrome, and that's or archetype, and that's simply not true, because there are a lot of Black people that don't share your experience. You need to read a book on the Black elite, or I forgot the name of it. They made it actually into a series. You know what I'm talking about? I think it's called On Our Own. It talks about the Black links and Jack and Jill and those types of black
What is
people.
that? Because I saw
Yeah,
this series.
they made it a TV series. I can't think of it right now. Maybe somebody in the comments knows about it. But it just really talks about how, you know, there are different classes of black people, and the notion that adults say don't go to class and sell drugs. I think that's one part of the culture, but it's not the entire culture.
And this is the thing, exposure is everything. Because let me explain this as well. A lot of people don't know much about my background unless you come from the Ritter. I grew up in the housing projects,
Mm-hmm.
straight housing projects,
So
government,
that's two different, yeah.
two different worlds. And you would, a lot of times it's interesting because I see people who come from the background I did, and our perspectives are not the same. But I would say that the exposure is everything. I
Yes,
was able to be integrated into a vast community of support, outside of my home, outside of my housing projects, and pursue opportunities that gave me the chance to have exposure. That is why the work that Joia is doing is so important, because when you start looking at the justice system, not just in terms of the death penalty, but in terms of all these injustices, people cannot be rehabilitated if they are not given a chance to figure this thing out.
that's it.
We're running into issues in this quote unquote justice system, particularly for Black men and women, that are not allowing rehabilitation and are not allowing the opportunities for them to go back into this world and be exposed. And I remember as a teacher that taught in, you know, impoverished schools, urban schools, whatever you want to call them, all the time, directly so, because I wanted to ensure that kids who came from the same kind of background that I did had the chance to receive some different type of exposure. Exposure
Mhm.
matters. Exposure
It does.
matters. But because of
It
a lot of the things that we've been through, we're really digging ourselves out of a hole. You know, we're trying to figure this thing out. You know, so what you say is so important. And I see the comment about music, but I just want to remind you that country music talks about drinking a lot. Rock
Yeah,
music talks about banging and slanging and violence a lot. So you know,
it's this perception of ourselves that you
it
mentioned
really is.
earlier.
It
I don't. I believe education can be a universal equalizer, but as I
can.
become more versed on just systems, I believe access to resources is the universal
But
equalizer, because college is not for everybody, and you know we
that's
need
it.
people that are entrepreneurs, but they need that access to, you know, venture
Expose.
capital, resources,
Expose.
and funders. So I believe
Absolutely.
that is the equalizer. Sometimes when it
Absolutely.
comes to people, it was so many when I was working in like criminal defense in Memphis. We had so many property crimes, and it was just people. We had mothers stealing like Pampers from Target, and Target would like prosecute them, and we had to go talk to people in Target and say, "Hey, can you route them in another direction? Is there something else they can do?" Because this is a crime of necessity. It's not like they're stealing TVs; they're stealing Pampers, they're stealing feminine products.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
access to resources to me is a universal equalizer. That's something that we need to talk about more. Entrepreneurships, funding, grants. We need to talk about contracts. We need to talk about those things that will really empower folks to do better in life, and also to have a sense of self-efficacy for themselves, and also promote that back to the community.
Hence the Black intellectualism movement. That's the whole
I love
reason
it.
that I thank you, that I continue to pray that this conversation will move forward, right? Because the goal is to bring people in to have talks. People need to know about women like Joia, what she's doing, the facts and numbers on, you know, if you have a child that you know in your heart is not guilty of the crime, but you feel that you don't have anywhere to go. Listen to what this woman is saying. Where do I
Yeah,
need to go next? How do I need to research for myself? That's why I hope that these conversations reach more people, because that's the mission,
right.
right? To put
Yeah.
that information out there, to give some type of exposure in whatever way it may help somebody, right? Because what you're saying is just solid,
Yeah, and we
solid,
have
all right.
resources, and you just brought it up. You know, if you have a child that you are rearing, or the child that you are connected to that is going through the criminal, the juvenile system, then we have a program, participatory defense, that teaches families how to advocate for their youth, how to advocate for their child, for their teen within the system, and not just listen to what a prosecutor or a judge or even their attorney, public defender may say. So we have those resources out there for you to be empowered, so you don't just have to sit in what you believe to be true about the system or feel helpless that you're going through that alone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. So let's go to the next question. Louisiana, and you kind of talked about this, so I don't know how far we'll need to go. Louisiana has over 60,000 men and women incarcerated, which is one of the highest prison rates in the world. So why is it so important for not just the Black community, but all citizens of Louisiana to get in on these conversations?
Right. And I think we answered that question a little bit earlier, but I will say Sister Helen Prejean, who is a notable death penalty abolitionist, she has a book, Dead Man Walking. She talks about her visit to an individual that was living on death row. That is an excellent read when you talk about just particularly in Louisiana, visiting individuals that are on death row. I would say to those who are listening, and if you're interested in this topic very seriously, Google someone and their case on death row in Louisiana. Look at the antecedents of that case. Really do a deep dive, or you can just Google and do like a YouTube search or Google search on all of the disparities that could have went wrong in a capital case in Louisiana. Really connect to that individual. Don't just view them as stats, but view them as individual people. Get to know their stories. A lot
Absolutely.
of their family members you may be living beside or working with. So you
Right.
have to get proximate. As Brian Stevenson says, you have to get proximate to these issues to really
Absolutely.
understand, to advocate, and to empathize with them.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. To advocate and empathize. And I think one thing people don't understand is that you do have to understand a little bit or know the ins and outs or try to learn past just what you hear in order to get a clear understanding of things and to break down those barriers of what people feed to us, but what we don't actually know through our own research, and
Mhm.
just our own learning, right? So when you talk about that component in particular is so important for us to like look for ourselves. I think about church, right?
Yeah.
Don't just remember what the preacher tells you in the pulpit. Go and read the word for yourself, right? So it's the same thing whenever we talk
And
about the
nowadays
work
with
that has to
online
be done.
church, you can Google it right then and there. Like, did the pastor say? You can click out of that box and click into
Immediately
Google.
Google it. Immediately Google it.
So they have to be on point now. If any
Fact check
ministers are listening,
immediately.
y'all got to be on
Fact
point
check.
now.
Yes, I love it. I love it. Um, so the next question is, because I feel like you already told us what we can do to support the work that you all are doing, but I have another question. What would you say could be some other options for people who are convicted of the death penalty? Instead of giving them the death penalty, what are some options you think can be put in place for these people to serve their time?
So there are very, very few options, but the only option that is now that's available is life without parole, or LWOP. Do I agree with this? No, I don't agree with this. But let's have some more conversations. Those who are innocent and the evidence has been proven that they are innocent, I definitely believe that they should be granted exoneration and full clemency, and they should be awarded expenses from the state. So that is the alternative that I would say for those who are innocent. For those who are clearly guilty and they're not fighting their guilty status, I definitely would say that the next available option would be life in prison. When you think about life, it gives the individual an opportunity to think about the things that they've done if they have that state of consciousness. Now, people with intellectual disabilities and severe mental illnesses, I do not believe that we should execute them at all. I don't even believe that they should be in prison. I believe that they should be in mental health facilities, and I believe the state should be responsible for allocating the funds within the capital punishment system to mental health services, to taking care of those particular individuals. I also don't agree that if an individual has committed a crime before the age of 25, according to brain science, an individual's brain is not developed until 25. So people that receive a death sentence between the ages of 17 and 25, no, I don't think they should receive a death sentence. And I do not believe that they should receive life without parole. I believe that the minimum should be 25 years. The maximum should be 25 years for that particular individual. So it's so many different legal ways that you can go as far as what is the next appropriate sentence for someone that has been accused of a crime, or that the crime is, it should be equated to a death sentence. But I definitely believe that it's other ways that we can rehabilitate an individual, or cause an individual to think about what they did.
So I have a question as well. Do you feel that the prison system or the justice system of our country is truly designed to rehabilitate people? And we're talking about outside of, people that are considered mass murderers or serious things like that. We're talking about just in general violent and non-violent crime offenders. Do you think that our system is truly set up to help them um, become rehabilitated? And I want to share a little story after that.
Okay. No, well, I'm not a prison abolitionist, but I do have friends that are prison abolitionists. And the conversations that we've had and the things that they've shared with me under our current system, no, I don't believe the current system is a system of rehabilitation, because our current system was built on slave patrol. Our current system was built upon the black codes that sentenced people to jail for vagrancy, or for failing to cross the street. Again, the things that were causing people to be lynched. So our current system, no, I do believe that other systems should be in place to rehabilitate individuals. And again, that's kind of starting with those mental health services. But our current system, no. But I do believe it's an opportunity, if more people are talking about it, for the system to be rehabilitated. But no, I don't think now as it stands, it doesn't.
Awesome. I saw this guy, so I'm a TikToker. Um, and I came across this guy who was sharing that he was a white guy and he served 20 something years in prison. And he was just basically saying that he was able to get rehabilitative support, therapy, all kinds of services because he basically had a family that had access and had money.
Right,
And so he had been on drugs and had committed some crimes. I can't remember what they were, but they were enough to land him in jail for like 20 years. And he admitted, he said, the problem is that there are so many people incarcerated who do not
mm,
have access to the same things. I had access because of my family, but there are many people who don't have the access to those resources because they don't have the family that I did. They didn't have the money, they didn't have the resources. And it kind of goes right back again to that racial divide, right? Because a lot of especially black men and women that end up locked up, they don't come
right,
from a family that has money to provide them with their own independent therapy services and ensure
right,
that you're able to get this, or even have enough money to ensure that the people inside are following through with some kind of plan to help you, shake back from this experience, learn to become a better person. So
right.
that's one of the things that made me ask that question to you when you shared the options for other ways that death penalty, those who are guilty of the death penalty can serve time. But in addition to that, I thought back to that video where this man talked about spending 20 years, but actually being rehabilitated because he had services that showed up constantly to help him.
Yeah, I mean, some people come out as better people, but unfortunately, the majority of people do not. They're traumatized. I've had family members that have unalived themselves after being a part of the prison system so long, and that's very personal to me when I say that out loud. knowing that that did happen to a family member. I think it's the first time I said it, but hopefully it helps someone. But yeah, a lot of people come out and they are not. So when I say I don't believe that currently the way the system is set up, is it rehabilitative? No. But I do believe that we have an opportunity in certain states to learn from other states and even other countries like Norway, who have a better grip on how to rehabilitate an individual. So again, it's more questions than definite answers. Like, do we want to be better as a country? Do we even want to be better as a state? These are all questions that we have to ask ourselves. And when it comes time for elections, y'all, don't just get fooled by a popsicle or a chicken dinner that they're going to give you to vote.
Yes.
Go to
Oh,
these
that
town
pot of
halls,
gumbo in
go to
Louisiana.
these town hall meetings and ask them the hard questions. And if they're not giving you the answers that you want, don't vote for them. Don't vote for
Absolutely.
them because we
Absolutely.
already know how they will think. So
Absolutely.
with our elected officials, if you believe in the political system, it's super important that we hold them accountable to the things that they say that they're going to do, and the time that they're not, or they're, you know, diverting from that, that we get them out of office as soon as possible, because
Absolutely.
it's too serious at this point, for people to just be sitting in office and not making a change and to be actively carrying bills. So shout out to Representative Cal Green and Senator Katrina Jackson for being bold enough to carry those bills.
And Senator Jackson is actually up here in our area, so she'll definitely hear that love, and people in this area will hear that love as well. So awesome, awesome, and that's what we like to hear is that, and I think that that's what's encouraging the citizens as well. One of the things I talk about all the time is like the voices not being given a place to actually speak, right? And so knowing that there are people who stand on the side of this line for individuals, hopefully helps people understand that you too can access your voice and speak up in some kind of way. So that's really important. So, next question. Do most families of the victims agree or disagree with ending the death penalty? And how do you overcome those who believe the death penalty is justice for their family or loved one?
Sure. So I've had conversations. I don't think I can speak to most because I don't know every murder victim's family member, but I will say some of the ones that I've come in contact with, they've told me that prosecutors hold over their heads to continue to seek the death penalty more than they actually want it. Because you have to understand that if you're seeking the death penalty, then an individual's family, they have to go to trial. They have to see bloody clothes,
Okay.
they have to see
Okay.
bloody weapons, they have to see all of those things in motion and in place in order for that trial to take place. So even if an individual that is accused and convicted has a death sentence, right? Sometimes it takes 15, 20 years right now in the state of Tennessee as we speak, or even as, maybe it has already happened. Oscar Smith in Tennessee, he was accused of a crime in 1989.
Mm-hmm.
This is
Mm.
2002 that we've just now set a date, and we're on this live right now, so I don't know if it's been carried out or not, but
I'm not sure
that's
either, but I was standing on top of that one. Yeah.
yeah, that's been over 30 years that he's been on death row, and I'm sure members of the family have, some that are here, some that have passed away. So even if some wanted to attend the execution, they probably had to pick like the seventh cousin. So you don't
Yeah.
get that perceived justice immediately. And there are a lot of families that say, you know what, I'll get my closure another way. I believe that some of those resources that we use to keep people on death row should be applied to victims' families receiving free counseling from the state. And if they are
Oh.
minors and their family member has been accused, then there should be some type of financial award in place, whichever the child decides to go. So whether it be education, free college, or whether it be another trade or a track that they choose to go. So that's kind of the stories that I've heard from family members. They were saying after the person was executed, if the person was executed during their time, they didn't feel any different. It was a perceived justice that they said, okay, he's dead, my family member's dead, I still feel bad. So it's almost kind of like what are we asking for? What are we asking? Are we asking for help? Are we asking just for another life to be gone? So we have to really ask ourselves that question, like, what does the death penalty do? Because it's not a deterrent to crime. And most people who are accused and convicted of the death penalty, it's one and done. It's not like they continue to do it because they're in jail now. So yeah, we have to ask ourselves a question of why? Like, what do we want from that death sentence for families? And a lot of families that I've spoken to, it doesn't provide them any solace.
What I what you said that was so important to me was I was thinking about the amount of time, and it even took me back to the sun does also shine where he was on death penalty for death row for 28 years he was incarcerated. And you're absolutely right. A lot of times, like if the parents or somebody was still alive, they're like so hurt by this. Those people have passed away. And so what you said is, what is it that we want from this? It's
What do we want?
crazy.
Just
What is
another
it that
life to be gone?
and
Okay.
so
If my sister, and you know how close I am to my sister Jane, if someone took the life of my
yeah,
sister,
yeah,
as mad as I would be, I want my sister back. I don't care.
yeah,
I don't care what happens to that person.
yeah,
Okay, put them to jail. That person can shoot themselves in the head. But
yeah,
I want my sister back. And if the system can't
yeah.
offer that, I don't want it.
I think what you said, what I continue to hear you say is what is very interesting to me is it seems that currently our system is punishment based, which goes back to the history of this country. And the direction that you and your organization are working toward is actually solution and recovery based
Mm-hmm.
for the family that has been hurt, for the person that may be serving life in prison, um, to really come to grips with what has happened and what can be done to recover from this.
Right.
And I think that that's a very interesting perspective to take, and it's very revolutionary. And it gets into the psychological aspect of this situation for everybody, which unfortunately I don't think that this country is still taking quite seriously yet.
Mm.
So that was so like that what you that was so groundbreaking what you shared in that moment. Um, so what else do you currently have going on, and what do we need to be aware of? What do we need to be keeping track of? What do we need to be listening to? What do we need to do?
So much. I mean, you can start with signing up for the newsletter for the Southern Center for Human Rights. But
Okay.
even locally in Louisiana, the Promise of Justice Initiative is an organization that you should definitely look up right there in Louisiana. They have different individuals and employees and strategists and organizers that work all over the state that Louisianians need to get plugged into. But I'm working on, and I saw you tweeted it. Thank you so much. You promoted it out. But I'm working with the role of medicine when it comes to capital punishment, particularly lethal injection. So I'm working with a group of Black pharmacists that we're going to have a focus group this summer. My goal is 50. I have 30 Black pharmacists. So if you're connected to a Black pharmacist, I would love to have them participate in this study in relation to lethal injection and their oath of do no harm and botched executions and the lethal injection litigation that I mentioned often. So I'm working with that group because I really want to start bringing in unique voices when it comes to capital punishment. We're always preaching to the choir of advocates and abolitionists and organizers and activists. But I do want to bring in business leaders. I do want to bring in the medical community, continuing working with intellectual disabilities and severe mental illnesses. But yeah, I'm working with so many different voices. And if you fit in one of those voices, or if you're connected to one of those voices that we're trying to bring into when it comes to education of the death penalty, I would love for you to connect directly with me, Joia Erin at schr.org. So we can have that conversation and start talking. And you can be looped into some of the cohorts that I work in. I also want to say the Death Penalty Information Center is a wealth of knowledge. One report in particular, Enduring Injustice, is a report that talks about racism and the death penalty. So if you have an opportunity today, or any day that you think about it, please visit deathpenaltyinformationcenter.org or DPIC, and that is something that will change your life when it comes to those reports.
Thank you so much. This internet has been so shaky since we had that storm
Oh,
last
I
week.
kept rolling. I kept rolling.
Thank you. You know what to do. You're an expert at this. I tried to like reboot everything before we got started, but it has been so shaky since last week. So thank you. And I heard everything she said in regards to the information about the opportunity for pharmacists to work with the Southern Humanity Center. I have posted that on my page. I will be sharing it again. I'm going to try to find out specifically. We actually have a pharmacy school here in Monroe. So I'm gonna
Hmm.
try to see if I can at least, get that information over to them as well, because there are definitely some people who might be interested in it. And I did ask them to tag pharmacists, so I will try to share that information again, because I think it's really important that Louisiana become more involved in any type of social justice work. And what you said tonight was so spot on when you said it doesn't matter what you do, just use that to involve and engage and expand and learn. Like, that is a contribution to seeing the black community to continue to make important strides. So I think
Right.
that this work toward the legal center system, understanding those biases, it affects the black community as well. So
Mhm.
that's very meaningful work. So I'll definitely be making sure to share that information. Is there anything else that we didn't address tonight that you think is really important for us to know?
Well, I just would say it's so many books out there. A book that I'm reading now, Let the Lord Sort 'Em. It talks about the death penalty system in Texas. And at one time, Texas had a reputation of frying more people than Kentucky Fried Chicken. Um, that is something that I definitely believe that more people should get involved in, when it comes to reading different books
Absolutely.
regarding the capital punishment system. The Descending Spiral is another book. I'm an English major, so
Exactly.
I'm naming off all, we both are. I'm
Yep.
naming off all these different books that, please, The Radical King is another book that I believe that more Black people should read, because King is often portrayed as very docile, and towards the end of his life, he wasn't, and he spoke out a lot about the death penalty. So, yeah, read those books. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Bay Joia. Follow me on
Yes.
Instagram at Justice Bay.
And I'll
So
be putting that in those
there's just
comments.
so many things that I have going on. But like I said, just plug into where you fit in. If this conversation prick your heart, we
Yep.
can always use more voices in our movement.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I have, and I will be putting the links or probably screenshots of those books as well as getting my order for them. I have a stack of like 3 books right now, plus the one I'm reading, to try to just dig more into this. And let me tell you something. It's what's interesting in, as you continue to read, you begin to see how those dots connect. And I think that that's one of the hard things, a lot of things we don't get to see, like, is a lot of time how the dots are connecting. So I think that's very important. And so I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. I do have a poem, and I also want to share some exciting news for you all. For those who
Yay!
have been following, I've been talking about transitioning some of my previous books into hard copies. And Pennies in My Pocket has been redesigned by me, and it is now in your hardback copy. And the second one, Blood is Supposed to Be Thicker, which is the novel, and Pennies in My Pocket, which is the collection of poetry, are now both available on Amazon in hardback. So you can start building your collection of those. And I'm going to read a poem from Pennies in My Pocket tonight. Being that, some nights I'll be in with the poem, some nights I won't, but being that it is also National Poetry Month, and honey, I have not blessed you all with any poetry this month because it's just being that kind of month. I do not want to leave this conversation without dropping some poetry. And I also want to let you guys know that next week we will have Sister Patricia Muhammad coming in to talk with us about gardening. We've been talking about the rising prices of food, and there has been definitely a surge in Black people who are interested in learning how to garden. Sister Patricia is so amazing. She knows that for the past couple of years, I haven't been able to garden the same way because you guys know I've had a couple of injuries. And so she has brought over just little trees and stuff that I can put on my porch, and all I have to do is water them. And she's going to talk about how she has managed to grow all of these things from seeds, and how you can start your garden, and the benefits of having gardens right there in your backyard so that you don't spend as much money at the grocery store. So I'll be putting that information out. And I want to thank Joia for coming tonight. This has been really, really awesome. And always being able to connect back with alumni and seeing all the great things that we're doing. And, it's just something that doesn't leave. Joia, one of the conversations we have a lot is we'll have people that ask things about, what it's like to go to a PWI. And I tell people all the time, we really understood the power of community as the Black students at a PWI, right?
What we did.
I will give LSU credit for having this space where we had our Black Student Union, we had our African American Culture Center, where we knew we had safe spaces to go, but we also knew that we were all in this thing together, and that we were sticking in this thing together to break down barriers, and to continue to prove to the next generation of Black students to come that you can handle this, you can excel, you can step into unfamiliar rooms and be comfortable and make things happen. So I'm really blessed, and I love everybody I had the chance to go to school with, because y'all were so phenomenal. And seeing women like Joia continue to use their mic to bring about change, I appreciate you, sister, and I value you. And I hope that soon we'll get to see each other in person. So that's going to be really important.
Yes,
I want to read this.
goal.
And we're going to work that out then. We're going to work that out then. That sounds good. And honey, if you need a sister to step up at any point, you let me know. I'm always available. But I'm going to actually read a poem called Failure System. The failure system of America used to be called the justice system of America until they opened our eyes. The black man down system of America used to be called the justice system of America until we realized that there is very little justice for us. Thousands rallied outside the prison for Troy Davis, believing there is black power in numbers, but the injustice system sent a clear message that sounds like, Negroes, go home. Ever since the inauguration of a man from the Black nation, it seems America has been attempting to remind us where we belong. My god sister refused to watch the help, stating that it is an untimely reminder of a place we should have never been, and where many others still wish we were. Negroes, you belong at the bottom of society. This is not a time of reflection. More than ever, it's a time of progression, my god sister says. The infamous race debate I must continue to litigate. They brutally killed a brother in Mississippi, yet the news casually browsed how white teens ran him down with a monster truck in a hotel parking lot. Nightmares of the past and the present. I waited for CNN to be shocked and astounded, wanted Fox News to be dumbfounded. Yet Nancy Grace's outrage was geared toward yet another white female who killed her kids. Negroes are irrelevant. I grieved. I grieved last night like Troy Davis was the brother I visited every week for the past 22 of my 28 years. I tossed and I turned, and let tears slide down the corner of my eye, realizing that this country is great and that this great country is everyone's land but mine. Negroes, get out. Reasonable doubt. All they needed was reasonable doubt, and Casey Anthony had probable cause, but for a black man, reasonable doubt, petitions, crowds, speakers, pleas, and activists are not enough because somebody has to die. Our justice system is really an injustice system that needs to pin somebody with the crime. May God have mercy on your souls. Well, Troy Davis, may he have something. Because my patience with the devastating race relations of this country are being tested, and I'm near the brink of laying down my Martin Luther. Sometimes I contemplated picking up my Malcolm X. I wrote that poem a long time ago.
Yes.
Thank you, friend. Thank you.
Now, I'm going to get my copy tomorrow because we have a week that's coming up that's commemorating Troy Davis' birthday, not his death day, his birthday in Georgia. So I want to either have you down here to read it or have someone, that you bless that will be able to read it in Atlanta. So that's amazing.
That would, oh my gosh, the irony. And I was just about to tell that story. That was 11 years ago. I'm 39. I wrote this when I was 28 about Troy Davis, the man who was executed. You guys, they literally had petitions signed. The public was begging them not to execute this man. They had enough evidence to recall the case, and they refused to do it, and they executed him. And I thought that that would be the perfect point to describe the frustration that we feel when our voices are not heard and our cries for people in the other cases we see on TV. And around that time that Troy Davis was executed, there was a black man in Mississippi who was staying in a hotel, and some teenage boys ran over him with a monster truck. And I had to dig the story up to find it, and it just came across my lap because I'm so close to Mississippi. But other than that, we didn't even see this story make national headlines. But we did see them execute this man, and they had reasonable doubt. They had petitions. They had witnesses that said we did not tell the truth when we told this story. We need to revisit it, and he was still executed. And that is why the work that Joia is doing is so important. It's exactly why. These men are somebody's son, somebody's brother, somebody's uncle, somebody's dad. And we, until the system, like she said, it is a system that is not perfect. It is a system that has far too many flaws to continue to have these same practices in place. I want to thank you so much, Joia, for having this conversation with us tonight. Thank you to everyone who has tuned in. Thank you to everyone that's going to go back and watch the replay. Please leave any comments below, and we look forward to hearing from you all again. Take care of yourselves, and good night.